what is it that makes a lick really iconic? I actually want to do something a little different today in that I want to go into, say, 8 to 10 different licks. I'm going to show you how to play them. I'm going to put the tabs up on the screen. But then I really want to try to figure out, what is it that makes these licks, so memorable and so iconic. So let's dive in. Now, I don't know about you, but for me, whenever I get a guitar solo or I'm trying to come up with, something to play on the guitar, my first instinct is to come up with something really flashy, try to run all over the fretboard and be really impressive and try to show out. But when I stop and think about the most iconic licks that I can think of, they're really not that complicated. They're not running all over the fretboard. They all have something in common, and that is they really keep it simple. So let's take a few examples. This is probably one of the most iconic licks that there is, and all we're doing, for those who say, well, I don't know how to play lead, all I know are my cowboy chords, this is a perfect example of one of those songs that tells you you don't have to run all these scales. You don't have to learn all of this stuff. You can play really cool things inside of your quote-unquote cowboy chords, just your normal chords that you play every day. So here we're just playing a D chord, this D note, and then hit the B and the G string. We're playing a C ninth chord, which is one that most of us know. Hitting that B and the G string again, and then our G chord, hitting our B and G string again. So again, this is one of those licks where I'm playing inside of a chord, just picking individual notes, and yet it becomes one of the most iconic licks in history. And when it comes to chords, there's actually several licks that almost everybody knows that are just inside of chords. For example, CCR was great. Fogerty was great at coming up with iconic licks that really weren't that complicated. So let's make a C7 shape. So you just make a normal C chord. We're going to add our pinky here on the 3rd fret of the G string, and that makes a C7th chord, which most of us are familiar with this chord. But if you're not, learn how to play this chord, because this chord is movable around the guitar neck. So I make a C7th, I move it up 2 frets, I get a D7th, and then if I move it up 2 more, I get an E7th. And inside of here, we can play things like, and again, I haven't even moved, I am just picking inside of this E7th chord. And all of a sudden, again, I've got a really iconic lick, and I haven't moved at all. I'm just holding this E7th chord. So just like with Sweet Home Alabama, when you're playing this one, you don't even have to change chords. And we've got a really iconic lick from Born on the Bayou by CCR. Another one that comes to mind when it comes to just playing chords and coming up with something really iconic is Bad Company. And so here, what we're going to do is kind of move these, play these chord inversions. So here, this is like a bar chord D shape. So we're up here on the 10th fret where your finger's laid across the 10th fret. But instead of playing the bar chord, we're going to play an F shape. So it's just like you took an F chord and you moved it up to where your pointer finger is on the 10th fret. And this is making a D chord. So you just strum that twice, move it down 2 frets. So now we've got a C chord. And then I'm going to make a D chord shape right here on the 7th fret. Put my pinky down here on the 8th fret of the E string, and then lift it up. This is a G chord. And that's why I talk about these movable chord shapes, because again, you can come up with some really cool licks by just playing these movable chord shapes. And we really haven't done anything but just strum inside of chords, and yet automatically, just by hearing this, you know exactly what song it is. It's a really catchy, iconic intro that's just using chords. Another one that comes to mind that everybody knows is, we're going to come back here, we're going to be in the key of D. So playing a D chord. And I am just holding this D chord here with these two fingers. And I'm just hammering onto this 3rd fret of the A string. So hit your A string, hit the 3rd fret, and then just kind of strumming that D chord. So again, I'm not doing a whole lot. I'm not moving a whole lot. I'm really only having to add this 3rd fret here on the A string. And again, I've got a really iconic lick that's easy to play that everyone will recognize. Now this one's silly simple. I mean, like, it's something that everybody knows how to play. I'm going to be in the key of A, and I'm just going to do like that normal 12-bar shuffle that you find in like rock and blues. All of a sudden, again, he hasn't done anything except we're just going back and forth between the 2nd and the 4th fret on the D string and hitting that open A. And Keep Your Hands to Yourself is one of the most iconic licks that you can play. And as a matter of fact, if you're playing this out like, you know, around the campfire or, you know, at the bar or the club or whatever, you hit this lick and everybody knows what that song is, and they go crazy, even though you have not done hardly anything that's impressive on guitar, and yet it still stands out as one of the greatest licks of all time. Now, when I think about some other licks that are really iconic, you know, we tend to think, well, I've got to learn all these scales, and I got to learn all these modes, and I got to learn all of this stuff around the fretboard. And really, when I stop and think about the ones that are iconic to me, the ones that are ear-catching, the ones that, you know, get stuck in my head, they're really just playing in these simple pentatonic shapes, or maybe just the major scale. So, you know, one that comes to mind is one that's used in several songs, but in this example, it's going to be Mannish Boy. So I'm in the key of A. I'm just kind of droning this A string a little bit, but I'm palm muting it. I'm kind of putting my hand here to deaden the string. I'm hitting the 7th fret on the D string, and then 7th fret on the G string, 5th fret on the G string, and then back to the 7th fret of the D string. Which sounds very similar to Bad to the Bone, which is in G. And we're just laying our finger flat here on the 5th fret. That gives us our C chord. Hitting those 3 strings open. Laying our finger flat on the 3rd fret, which gives us a B flat chord. And then back to the open G. But Mannish Boy the same way, just in the box in A. So both of those licks, you know, very similar to each other, but still not doing anything really complicated inside of that minor pentatonic scale that we all know. So one that I grew up listening to and loved as a kid, and I still love this song, is Wipeout by the Safaris, and we're going to be in the key of E, and all I'm going to be doing is playing 3 notes out of my pentatonic scale and then walking up chromatically back to my 1 note. Now when it goes to the 4 chord, you just take that same idea and you move it down 1 fret, and now you're over the A chord. When it goes to the 5 chord, you take what you were playing in A and move it up 2 frets because that will now make it a B, back to the A, and then back to the E. So again, a really iconic lick that doesn't require anything fancy, but yet it's ear-catching and really iconic. Now, one of my favorite licks of all time, one of my favorite intros, is this one. And you might be thinking, now Dave, that's much more complicated. And yes, it is in a way. But this particular lick, Mom, I'm Coming Home, is actually at its core pretty simple. So I'm in the key of E, and all I'm going to be doing is walking down the major scale. So I'm just walking down the major scale there in E. What makes this lick, a little more difficult to play is that after I hit that note, I'm going to hit the open B and the open E string, and it takes a little bit to get this kind of moving together. But again, the idea to this lick is really simple. Walk down the major scale in E, and in between that, just hitting a combination of those open B and E strings. So play around with that idea, because there's several different songs that kind of use this idea. Mom, I'm Coming Home is just the one that kind of sticks out in my head as really memorable and iconic. Now, my point in showing this to you was to point out something that I forget all the time. When I'm trying to play a solo, or when I'm trying to, come up with some song, I'm oftentimes thinking, well, I've got to show off. I've got to, run some crazy scale, or, I got to, do some sweep picking technique, or, run some really fast arpeggio. But the things that are really iconic, the things that are memorable, the things that people will remember are generally the really simple ideas. So don't think that you have to be overly complicated to create something memorable. It's the opposite. Usually simple is much better. And for y'all who message and say, well, I can't play, these lead licks because, my fingers are too fat or they don't move that fast, I just showed you several where these licks are just inside of simple chords where they're not moving and we're not doing that much. So don't think that you can't do this. You can. Now, there are certain things you might not be able to play, and there are certain things I'm not able to play, and I'm okay with that. But keep it simple. Don't think that you have to, learn all of these new things. Sometimes what you're searching for is in things that you already know. And I hope this helps. And as always, if you need something, reach out to me, because I truly am here to help you.